Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today I want to talk about a short story that I read because it is Short Story Tuesday, a great day to talk about all the short form literature that exists in the world. So today I want to talk about a short story that focuses on political upheaval and revenge. I am referring to Paul Laurence Dunbar and his short story, The Scapegoat. For those that don't know, Paul Laurence Dunbar was an African-American author who primarily wrote between the 1870s and the early 1900s. He was known for writing poetry, short stories, and novels. His parents were enslaved before the Civil War, so he wasn't that far removed from the Civil War, and so he was known for writing about the African American experience pre and post Civil War, which is a pretty big deal given the time period. One of the first Black authors to be able to do so. So he was also celebrated by some literary journals, especially Harper's, as they praised his writing style, and a lot of people offered to pay his way in college so that he could write more poetry, write more books, become better at his craft. Unfortunately, at the end of his life, he ended up developing tuberculosis pretty shortly. He died around 33 years old, and he was estranged from his wife because he was abusive toward her. So not the best lives lived near the end of it. But he did write some good fiction that I think is worth talking about, especially The Scapegoat. So without further ado, let's talk about The Scapegoat. I will do a summary and analysis, and we will move on from there. So The Scapegoat focuses on Robinson Asbury, an African-American man who runs his own barbershop in the city of Cadgers. Cadgers is segregated at this time. It's the Jim Crow era. He has a pretty popular barbershop. It's a community hub where people come and they talk about various goings on. The local political party sees this as an opportune moment to use Asbury to gain influence. Because of his influence, they give him money and resources to nudge people in their direction, as political parties tend to do. In the process, he develops a love for politics. So he takes the bar exam and makes friends with Judge Davis in the process, a local town judge, and he sets forth going forth in politics, and he becomes a man of the people in the process. However, he rubs two other lawyers, Bingo and Latchet, the wrong way. Bingo and Latchet are lawyers, as I mentioned, and they wanted to do exactly what Robinson is doing. Unfortunately, he beat them to it, and as a result, they form a rival faction aimed at ousting Robinson as the popular figure in the community. They rely on a school principal named Morton. Unfortunately, Morton isn't that popular, and so Robinson ends up beating him in whatever they're running for, whether it be the leader of the local parade or something like that. And so during an upcoming election, it appears that Robinson is going to be the winner. However, after the election, local people become concerned about corruption and fraud. And once there is actual corruption established and people note that money has been trading hands, the local political party looks for a scapegoat, someone to blame in the process. They think because the character of Bingo sort of allied himself with Robinson, they have initially looked to him, but he doesn't have enough power, and they don't want to look at the party leaders because they have all of the power, and so they go for someone in the middle, Robinson, who has done crimes, but not nearly enough as the other people. So he's just a a scapegoat, as it were, someone to blame, to distract from the fact that there is, other people who are much more responsible with the fraud and corruption. Asbury goes before a trial where he's found to be guilty and sentenced to 1 year in jail. And at his sentencing, he names names. He basically says who the corrupt people are, and some people in the crowd assert that he should be killed or something like that because he's pointing fingers and stuff like that. He stopped short of pointing at Judge Davis, who is overseeing his trial, because Judge Davis he views as a friend, and Judge Davis feels that that's too good for him, but he doesn't retire or do anything like that. Asbury spends almost a year in prison. He gets out for good behavior, which is always nice. And afterwards, he notes that he has no interest in politics. He's just running a newspaper stand and going about his day. It's clear that maybe what had happened to him ruined his taste for politics. However, it did not ruin Bingo's taste for politics, as he has set about running for local office, and he finds himself against the man Morton, who he was using earlier to get at Robinson. Bingo actually turns to Robinson for assistance in this, as his word has a lot of sway in the community, and Robinson says that he's not a political man, but he will help Bingo because they are friends. Unfortunately, Bingo discovers that at one of the local parades, a lot of his allies have turned towards Morton, and he slowly figures out that Robinson is to blame for this, that he hasn't forgotten what Bingo did to him almost a year ago. And so Bingo turns to the party leaders, and they're a little bit worried that they've awoken a sleeping dragon, sleeping giant, or something like that. And they turn to Robinson to get him to not do anything bad. And as a result, he says, "Oh, I'm not interested in politics. I'm an ex-con. I have no interest there." And so that assuages their fears. And so at the next election, there's a mass turnout, much more than usual. Unfortunately, this mass turnout is against all the party leaders. And so they're all voted out, except for Judge Davis, who, as we noted before, was friends with Robinson. There's a hubbub in the community, but when a reporter turns up to talk to Robinson, he notes, "Oh, I have no interest in politics." But it's clear that he organized all of this, and so the story ends with the entire city of Cadgers understanding what they had done to this man and how he had taken his revenge. In terms of analysis, this is a typical rise and fall story with a bit of a twist in that it features some revenge. You have a man of the people who is corrupt, kind of in all of the president's men or all the king's men, something like that, where he comes from a low place, rises up, and then falls back down to earth when a link to corruption is established. And I thought, oh wow, this is a typical story of what Dunbar is doing. But then he goes whole hog with the revenge aspect, and I thought that was just brilliant on his end. This nice fella, Robinson Asbury, who doesn't seem like he would harm anyone, is actually a Game of Thrones level anti-hero, sort of coming out of prison and deciding to get back at every single person who wronged him, and ended up getting him sent to jail. Except for Judge Davis, of course, because he feels a kinship with him, and so I really like what Dunbar did with that element of the story. I also like the big theme of this story with the making of a scapegoat. You have someone who starts out at a very low place in society and works his way up to becoming sort of a community leader through the barbershop, and eventually gaining some sense of political capital by working with the party leaders. The party leaders needed him to be this community figure and to have this political capital so that they could twist his ear, or whatever the phrase is, and use him to convince other people to vote for the political party. The party has no problem with giving him some amount of power. Unfortunately, his rising through the ranks upset a lot of people, and so when something goes wrong, when it's clear that he's getting too big for his britches and they need someone to take the fall, that someone is unfortunately Robinson Asbury. Somebody needs to be to blame, even if the crimes that Asbury committed weren't necessarily as bad as what the major leaders of the party committed. Dunbar even notes in the story that Asbury committed some crimes in his rise to the top, but unfortunately they weren't as big as what the political leaders were doing. And there's an interesting quote I would like to read to you. It was a close election and many things had to be done, but there were men there ready and waiting to do them. They were successful, and then the first cry of the defeated party was, as usual, fraud, fraud. The cry was taken up by the jealous, the disgruntled, and the virtuous. Someone remembered how 2 years ago the registration books had been stolen. It had been upon good authority that the money had been freely used. Men held up their hands in horror at the suggestion that the Negro vote had been juggled with, as if that were a new thing. From their pulpits, ministers denounced the machine and bade their hearers rise and throw off the yoke of a corrupt municipal government. One of those sudden fevers of reform had taken possession of the town and threatened to destroy the successful party. They began to look around them. They must purify themselves. They must give the people some tangible evidence of their own yearnings after purity. They looked around them for a sacrifice to lay upon the altar of municipal reform. Their eyes fell upon Mr. Bingo. No, he was not big enough. His blood was too scant to wash away the political stains. Then they looked into each other's eyes and turned their gaze away to let it fall upon Mr. Asbury. They really hated to do it, but there must be a scapegoat. The god from the machine commanded them to slay him. What that quote is getting at is that when corruption is found out and when the town needs to be satisfied with the blood of someone, they can't use someone small low to the ground. They need someone fairly close to the higher-ups. Unfortunately, they can't use the higher-ups because that would be the political party being held for account, and no one's going to want to do that. And so they got to use someone who has a fair amount of power, but not enough to cause any major status quo change, because they do reference the god from the machine, which is Deus ex machina, which is a way for sort of something coming from nothing and saving the day. But there's a status quo that needs to be maintained, and in order to do it, Mr. Asbury has to go to jail and be put on trial for his behavior, which is very interesting. I do like that there's another quote here that's about how the political party promises reform, but they also don't actually give that reform. And so the people of Cadres eventually realized that Mr. Asbury was given a rough deal of it because he was basically sacrificed for nothing because the party didn't commit to reform, which is often the case in society as political parties promise reform and give nothing in return. I do have to wonder what the nature, what the connection is to race, and because the story does take place in the Jim Crow era, and Asbury is noted as being a black man who came from nothing. Not only does this political party want someone to blame, it's perfectly logical at the time that a black man such as Asbury would be that scapegoat, because the system would have no problem with tossing away a black man. If it were a white man, there'd probably be a little more uproar. So I do have to wonder if Dunbar is trying to highlight not only the issue of political corruption targeting a regular person, but also targeting a black man. Another interesting element of the story is revenge. Particularly satisfying revenge. Not only does he get it later in the story, but at his trial, he names names. He basically points out all of the people who are responsible for corruption, so much so that people in the audience want to kill him, stopping short of naming Judge Davis, of course. So he does get some initial revenge, but that doesn't seem to affect anyone in particular, possibly because it's the rantings of a guilty man or something like that. But he does get he does exact his revenge, first through Bingo. When Bingo turns to him for help, Bingo assumes that he's pulled the wool over Ashbury's eyes by convincing him that he's been his friend all along. But Asbury knows. Asbury knows that he's always been allied against him, and that he was willing to sell him out when this corruption hullabaloo started. So he gets his revenge by having his friends back Morton instead of Bingo, which not only ruins his political chances, but also causes his law partner Latchet to turn against him. So pretty satisfying there. And then Asbury gets his revenge against the entire political party by convincing them, I am not interested in getting revenge here. And when that seems to, sway their fears, which it absolutely should not, he manages to get everyone to vote them out, except for the judge. And that has to feel so satisfying for Asbury here, to get revenge against everyone in one fell swoop. And they learn their lesson. The entire town learns their lesson. There's an interesting quote that I'd like to read to you. The generalship that had engineered the thing was perfect. There were loud threats against the news dealer, but no one bothered him except a reporter. The reporter called to see just how it was done. He found Asbury very busy sorting papers. To the newspaper man's questions, he had only this reply: "I am not interested in politics, sir." But Cadger's had learned its lesson. Which I think is pretty funny. The city now knows not to mess with this man, not to underestimate a black man that you think you can just screw over and everything will be fine. Asbury proved them wrong there. But he does say, "I am not in politics, sir." He says that a couple times as people approach him near the end of the story. And I think it's clear, well, if he's not in politics, what is he in then? The answer is that he's out for revenge. Like, that's all he wants. And then afterwards, maybe he might try to be in politics. But initially, he just wants the people who are corrupt and who done him wrong to suffer. Anyway, so those are my thoughts on The Scapegoat by Paul Laurence Dunbar. It's a fascinating short story, one that I definitely recommend. It's a lot of fun to read, especially near the end when Asbury is trying to get his revenge. I definitely recommend that you go seek it out and read it. I'll put a link to it in the description. You should be able to find it online. I can't believe I've never heard of Paul Laurence Dunbar before. This is a high quality short story, and unfortunately, sad to say, I only sought him out because it's Black History Month. I probably never would have known about him without this month. So that's I probably have a lot of work to do to find authors like that who have high quality work, but I just wouldn't seek them out normally. So anyways, those are my thoughts. If you have any thoughts, if you read this story before and you want to comment on it, do so below. I would love to hear from you. Let's have a discussion about scapegoatism. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that other people can find out about this great short story and Paul Laurence Dunbar. And in the meantime, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and political travels. Farewell.